So, what I want to get into is how mechanical metaphors, how the metaphor of mind as machine has, in some ways, become very pervasive and, if you like, hijacked our imaginations. But also our sense of who we are, our sense of how we act and operate in the world, in our relationships, even how we think about how to grow and develop. It's deeply, deeply embedded in a common sense assumption of the world. And you can see it in speech, in everyday speech, all the time. So I feel shut down, broken down, she's switched off, he's run out of steam, I'm feeling a little bit rusty today, I'm full up, I'm buckling under the pressure, I'm shattered, I'm going to pieces, I'm overloaded. So these are all colloquial expressions that we use in everyday life to talk about ourselves. But what I want to get into, it's not just about speech, it's kind of gone deeper than that, which is what we're exploring. Metaphors aren't just about language, they're about how we inhabit the world, how we perceive the world. And I think what's happened is, because Isaac Newton came up with these wonderful laws in physics and allowed us to develop steam engines, and then cars, and then jet engines, and then telephones, and you know, all of medical technology, etc., etc., etc. We've had a lot of success in that paradigm. It's kind of spilled over into how we think about social organizations, business organizations, and ourselves. We apply this sort of physical way of looking at the world to ourselves as people, and it's present in economics, it's present in business theory, it's present in psychotherapy. We think about our issues, our problems, as if they're mechanical. So what does that mean? So first, there's two things. We reduce the complex whole, we break it down like a watch mender, we break it down into its constituent parts. So we see something with this problem, we don't quite understand it, and we think, let's make this simpler, let's break it down into its constituent parts. Okay, so maybe you go to the doctor and you're not feeling very well, and they isolate that there's something wrong with this organ, or there's something wrong, you've got a virus in your system. Okay? And you might do that in therapy. In the therapy world, we might come in, we're feeling depressed, and then the therapist might think, well, how can I simplify this problem? How can I understand this better? And they might focus in on how you think. They might focus in on how you've got judgmental thoughts, how you're giving yourself a hard time. And if we can work with that, we can take you out of being depressed. Now, I'm not saying that's wrong, but obviously it's a massive simplification. You've taken something that's really complicated and you've reduced it down into its constituent parts. It's a little bit like you've got a movie poster of Star Wars, and it's very difficult from that movie poster to figure out what the movie's about. It gives you a kind of clue, but it's not dynamic. It simplifies in terms of breaking things down into small parts, and then also it's static. It's saying this one thing is wrong. So that's reductionism. The second aspect of approaching things mechanically is determinism. So once you've broken things down into the little parts, brilliant. We've got this billiard ball way of thinking of the world, and we can look at the cause and effect interactions of those smaller parts. And in that way we can predict and control and create the outcome that we need. And I think that's what's seductive, that's what's so seductive about the mechanical model, is that because machines are predictable and controllable, I mean, they've been designed by somebody to do a task, there's no surprises there. When we think about ourselves in this machine-like way, it's slightly seductive because it offers, consciously or not, a promise of a predictable life, a controllable life, one that we can affect through cause and effect interactions that we kind of understand. Now, most people, if I asked you, is that how you go about life? Is that how you go about your work? Are you a mechanic in your everyday life? Most people would understandably say, no, I'm not a mechanic, okay? However, it's just in there in the fabric of how we've been brought up and how we get told stories about things, and indeed it is there in how we've been trained. And in my training as a therapist, it's there, and you can think of a sort of plan, do, review approach. So it's kind of like you talk to someone, you gather lots of information, data, and then you go away and you think about it and you come up with a plan, right? And the plan is basically, I'm going to affect this cause and it's going to create this outcome. I'm hoping for this outcome. And then you go back and you talk to the person and you try and do what you've planned to do, and hopefully you're going to get the outcome that you're expecting. So it's kind of plan, do, review approach. And to a large extent that's coming from a mechanical paradigm. You've broken down the problem, you've decided if I can affect this action, it will lead to this outcome. Now, I'm going to kind of question that, because the thing is, we're not freaking machines, okay? We're people. And organizations, businesses made up of people aren't machines either. And neither do they behave like machines. It's kind of like we've just kind of fostered this template of how things should act onto them. So for example, in the education system, they try and improve the education system, so they break it down and they say, well, the children should have these learning outcomes, this is what they need to do, and that means the teacher needs to have these lesson plans, and we need to make sure that they do these lesson plans, and then we want them all to assess themselves and fill in all these forms, and then we'll check up on that and make sure they're doing it. If they're not doing it, we'll send the teacher on a course so that she does this. And it's like there's more and more control coming in, and less wildness, less and less freedom for the individual elements in the education system to interact and respond to what's needed on the ground in that unruly, messy, unpredictable moment that occurs between the teacher and the child. Apparently the UK is 24th out of the 25th developed nations in education rating, and it's been getting worse over the last decade. But the answer is to bring in more and more of this kind of top-down control, trying to fit people into cogs in the machine type thinking. Now, while the mechanical metaphor offers a certain control, I'd like to suggest to you today it's a metaphor out of control, because we're not machines. Now, that might seem a little bit counterintuitive, because in some ways, well, if we've not got that, what do we have? Because if we can't think about things and think about how to act and think in terms of cause and effect, we're just left with chaos. Maybe. But I'm going to offer other ways to think about how we interact, and other ways to think about how we change, and other metaphors that means we're not just left with chaos. But also you might be sitting here listening to this thinking, oh my God, great, you're right. I've secretly been thinking this all along. And actually, in my work, even though I'm trying to fit into this mechanical paradigm, the things that really happen seem to happen unbidden. They seem to happen mysteriously. I didn't make them happen. They're mysterious. They happen despite my mechanical intentions. And this is the whole point, because if we can step back from being lost in seeing things mechanically, then perhaps we'll notice more frequently and more clearly these small events that are leading to change and development and growth that don't fit into that paradigm. The danger is, if we are lost in seeing the world as a machine, we only see the world as a machine, and we edit or filter out these wilder, more spontaneous, messy happenings. So what I'd like us to do is just have a think about how you notice the machine metaphor in your life. Where and how do you understand problems by breaking them down like this into constituent parts? Where and how do you employ cause and effect interventions to solve problems? And how is that working out for you? And secondly, have you noticed changes that were unforeseen and unpredictable? And how have you understood and responded to those changes? And if those unforeseen events, how did they live alongside that more mechanical way of looking at things?